My son's wedding turned out to be a nightmare after the Maid-Of-Honor'S speech. The day my son got married was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. But as I sat in the crowd, watching the speeches unfold, I had no idea that a single sentence would expose secrets I never imagined and shatter everything I thought I knew about my son. My name is Linda, though most of the younger folks call me Mrs. Green. I've always prided myself on being a good mother. Not a perfect one, but good enough to raise my son Connor into a man with strong values. The kind of man who knew how to treat women with respect, how to stand up for the weak, and how to be kind without expectation of reward. So, when he introduced me to Carrie, his girlfriend, I thought I had done my job well. Carrie was polite, sweet, and seemed to have that old-fashioned humility you don't often see in girls these days. They'd been dating for a few years by the time Connor asked her to marry him, and I couldn't have been happier for them. But life, as I've come to realize, has a way of taking your carefully laid plans and shattering them in an instant. Before I get into the mess that was their wedding, let me tell you a bit about how I got here. Sitting on a park bench alone, running my fingers over the wedding invitation I now keep in my purse like some cursed memento. Connor was my first and only child, and we were close. Maybe too close at times, but I was mindful not to be one of those mothers who couldn't let go. I wanted him to be independent, to find his way in the world, and he did. He was always so driven, so focused on his dreams of running his own tech company that I hardly had to push him at all. But more than anything, I could see how much he cared about Carrie. It was obvious in the way he looked at her. And not just that, there was always a kind of deep admiration whenever he mentioned her name or talked about her. "Mom, don't you think she's amazing?" Connor asked me one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. There was a warmth in his voice, a kind of pride I hadn't heard before. I smiled, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "She is, Connor. She's got a good head on her shoulders. She's kind, and it's clear she cares about you deeply." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "It's more than that, though. I've never met someone like her. She's independent but grounded. She doesn't care about the flashy stuff. You know, she takes public transportation when her car breaks down and never asks for anything expensive. It's refreshing." I couldn't argue with that. Carrie seemed different from the women Connor had dated before. She wasn't one to ask for lavish gifts or extravagant dates. Her gifts to us were always thoughtful, but never excessive, and I admired that. Still, I did what any concerned mother would do. I snooped a little. Carrie lived simply, drove a beat-up car, and didn't seem to expect much financially from Connor. But there were moments, small things that stood out. Like the fact that she occasionally treated herself to spa weekends or dined at high-end restaurants. It wasn't frequent, but it was enough to make me wonder where the money came from. "Doesn't that seem odd to you?" I asked Connor one afternoon. "She's living so modestly, but then she splurges every now and then." Connor shrugged, looking thoughtful. "She works hard, Mom. Maybe she's just good at saving. Besides, everyone deserves to treat themselves once in a while, right?" I nodded, letting it go. Maybe I was overthinking it. True, I guess we all have our little indulgences. But then came the night we were invited to dinner with her parents. I still remember standing outside, waiting for a cab, only to have a luxury car pull up in front of the house. "Mom, did you order this?" Connor asked, his eyes wide as he looked at the black sedan. I shook my head, just as confused as he was. "No, I thought we were getting a cab. This must be a mistake." The driver stepped out, addressing us politely. "I'm here to take you to the restaurant. Miss Carrie's parents have sent me." I was floored. Here we were, expecting a simple dinner, and instead, we were being chauffeured in a car that looked like it belonged to a CEO. Later, I discovered that Carrie's father owned a renowned construction company. Their family had money, and lots of it. I didn't see that one coming. So, I started as we exchanged pleasantries at the dinner table. "Carrie doesn't seem to live quite like this." I gestured towards their luxury car, unable to suppress my curiosity. Her mother, a slim woman with perfectly styled hair, smiled at me with an air of amusement. "Oh, that's by design," she explained. "We don't pay for Carrie's day-to-day life. She's got to make her own way. but when she decides to start a business, or if she ever needs help with something important like her dream wedding, we'll be there for her." "That's an interesting arrangement," I commented, glancing at Carrie, who seemed unfazed by the conversation. Carrie shrugged. "It keeps me grounded, I guess. I don't want to rely on their money for everything. I want to earn my living." But Connor's reaction was different. I could see the wheels turning in his head. Carrie may have had everything, but she wasn't flaunting it, at least not openly. And Connor? He saw this as an opportunity, not just for their marriage, but for the business he'd been dreaming of for years. As we left the dinner, Connor looked at Carrie with a glint in his eye. "What if we start something together?" he asked her, almost breathless with excitement. Carrie smiled and nodded. "Let's do it." And I remember thinking, this is it. This is their future together. Not just a marriage, but a business partnership. I was proud. But sometimes, even when everything seems perfect on the surface, trouble is brewing just beneath. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I noticed Carrie seemed off. She wasn't as vibrant as she had been before. Connor didn't seem to notice, lost in his excitement over their business venture, but I could see the tiredness in her eyes. "Is everything all right, Carrie?" I asked one afternoon while we were sitting on the patio, sipping tea. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Green. Just the usual wedding nerves." She brushed me off, but something in her voice made me worry. Was she having second thoughts about the wedding? About Connor? The morning of the wedding was beautiful. The sun was shining, the flowers were in full bloom, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Carrie looked stunning in her gown, but there was something about her smile that felt forced. At the reception, I noticed a tense conversation between Connor and Susan, Carrie's maid of honor. They were standing near the bar, their voices too low for me to make out, but the tightness in their body language was unmistakable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When the time came for the speeches, I held my breath. I had no idea what was about to happen, but I could feel the tension in the air. Susan stood up, glass in hand, and the room went silent. "Carrie," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "you've been my best friend for years. You've always been there for me, through everything. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about myself." My heart skipped a beat. Susan took a deep breath and continued. "This whole thing has to stop. Connor and we've been having an affair. We have been cheating on you for months." There was a stunned silence in the room, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I looked over at Carrie, expecting her to break down in tears or storm out in rage, but she didn't. Instead, Carrie let out a laugh, a cold, chilling laugh that echoed through the hall. "Oh, Susie," she said, shaking her head, "thank you for finally saying something. I thought I'd have to do it myself." The room was frozen. All eyes were on Carrie as she stood up, her face calm, but her eyes blazing with fury. "You see," she continued, walking towards Susan, "I've known about the two of you for a while now. I just wanted to see if you had the guts to admit it." She snatched the microphone from Susan's hand, her voice growing sharper with each word. "That's why I made sure I caught you both in the act. For this reason, I installed cameras in the house, and I saw everything," Carrie announced, her voice dripping with anger. "And, in case you're wondering, Connor," she turned to face him, her eyes narrowing, "you signed a prenup? Guess what happens when you cheat?" The room erupted in whispers, but Carrie wasn't done. "I've got one last surprise for you," she said with a smirk. "Enjoy the cake. I made sure to lace it with a nice laxative. You'll be spending your wedding night in the bathroom." Chaos broke out as people started running for the exits, the whispers growing into full-blown panic. Connor stood frozen, his face pale as he realized what had just happened. As the room cleared, Carrie walked up to me, her expression softening. "Mrs. Green," she said quietly, taking my hand, "you've always been kind to me. I don't hold anything against you." I could barely speak. My throat was tight with emotion, and all I could do was nod. That night, as I walked out of the wedding hall, I realized I didn't know my son as well as I thought. The man I had raised, the boy I had loved and nurtured, had turned into someone I could no longer recognize. And with that realization, I knew I had lost not only a daughter-in-law, but a son as well. Looking back now, sitting here with that wedding invitation still tucked away in my purse, I realize that maybe I should have done more. Maybe I should have asked the hard questions and should have dug deeper instead of standing on the sidelines. But hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it?